Chapter 26. So Jem is in the 7th grade, which for them, that means that he's in high school. And he went out for football, but he is too small. So he gets the job of the water boy, and he loves it because remember, Jem loves football. So we see a sign of Scout maturing as she's walking back and forth past the Bradley house to go to school when she, looks at the house and it's still creepy to her and everything, but she says, I feel kind of bad for all the things that we did to him. Like, what reasonable recluse wants kids poking a fishing pole through his shutters and sneaking around through his garden at night and things like that? She does have some like daydream type things that one day she'll walk by and he'll be sitting on the front porch and they'll just have a normal conversation and just wishing, she says something to Atticus about, I just wish that once before I die, I get to see him. And Atticus is like, oh, tell me that you're not reviving all of that stuff about Boo Radley, because I am too old to chase you off that property. And Mr. Nathan shoots at any shadow he hears, even if it is a size 4 barefoot footprint. And she's just like, he knew, all along he knew that Mr. Nathan had shot and that it was his kids that were back there. So at school one day, they do a thing called current events, where you have to bring in a newspaper article and tell what it's about and that kind of thing. So Cecil Jacobs, remember, he was the kid that he was the first one to call Scout's dad a name for defending Tom Robinson. And he's the first one that she walked away from a fight with. So Cecil Jacobs gets up there and he's got an article about old Hitler, and the teacher corrects him, never start with old anybody. All right, well, old Adolf Hitler. I think it would be funny to be a teacher of these kids. But Scout is in the 3rd grade now, and her teacher is Miss Gates. So we got a different name going on here. Basically, Cecil's take on the article, and he doesn't quite have it all right. Old Adolf Hitler's been after the Jews for a long time. He's putting them all in prison, and he's washing the feeble-minded because they don't have, they're idiots, and they don't know how to keep themselves clean, so he has to wash them. So, not exactly what was happening, but close enough for a 3rd grader. This leads Miss Gates to, a wonderful teaching moment that, she wasn't planning, but when you get these moments, you got to take them as a teacher. And so somebody says, how come Hitler could do that? Why did people let him? And so the teacher goes and starts teaching about democracy. She writes down the board and she says, we are a democracy. Germany is a dictatorship. Page 245 has some really good information when she says, we are a democracy and Germany is a dictatorship. Dictatorship, she said. Over here, we don't believe in persecuting anybody. Persecution comes from people who are prejudiced. Prejudice, she enunciated carefully. There are no better people in the world than the Jews, and why Hitler doesn't think so is a mystery to me. One of the kids asks, why don't they like the Jews? And she says, well, they're a deeply religious people. They contribute to every society that they live in. Maybe he's trying to get rid of religion. And Cecil says, well, I don't know for certain, he said. They're supposed to change money or something, but that ain't no cause to persecute them. They're white, aren't they? So the idea of a white person being persecuted, he's like, what? Why would they do that? And Miss Gates says, when you get into high school, you'll learn that the Jews have been persecuted since the beginning of history, even driven out of their own country, Israel. It's one of the most terrible stories in history. So, I want you to take a look at her definitions here. She says the Jews are good people, no better people in the world. And her reasoning is that they contribute to every society that they are a part of. Can you apply that definition to African Americans? I think so. They are a deeply religious people. Can you apply that? Yes. They have been persecuted since the beginning of history, even driven out of their own country. African Americans were taken from places that they lived and sold as slaves and brought over to America. How much more driven out of your country can you get? So, all of these definitions that she uses about the Jews could be applied to African Americans. Okay? And I want you to catch that statement that she said over here, we don't persecute anybody. Persecution comes from prejudice. All right. So she's teaching against these principles of persecution and prejudice. And so you would think her to be a really fair, open minded, non prejudiced type person. Okay. So a little bit later in the chapter, Scout goes to Atticus and says, Atticus, is it okay to hate Hitler? And he says, no, it's not okay to hate anyone. Well, Miss Gates got all red in the face when we talked about Hitler. Well, I would think that she would. You know, you should be upset with what he's doing, but that doesn't mean that you hate him. So she doesn't think she can put it into words, so she goes to Jem. Now, Jem is in his room. She walks in and she sees 12 banana peels and an empty bottle of milk. And she's like, what you stuffing for? And he says he has to gain 25 pounds so that he can play football. So that should give you an idea of how small he really is, right? 25 pounds is a lot of weight for a boy to gain at this age. Maybe you gain 5 pounds a year. Maybe if you have a growth spurt, you might gain 10 pounds a year, but 25 pounds? So Jem is really a small kid. All right. She asks Miss Gates about it. And on page 247, she says, Miss Gates is a nice lady, ain't she? Why, sure, I liked her. She hates Hitler a lot. What's wrong with that? Well, she went on today about how bad it was, him treating the Jews like that. Jem, it's not right to persecute anybody, is it? I mean, have mean thoughts about anybody even, is it? Well, gracious no, Scout, what's eating you? Well, coming out of the courthouse that night, Miss Gates was. She was going down the steps in front of us. You must not have seen her. She was talking with Miss Stephanie Crawford. I heard her say it's time somebody taught 'em a lesson. They were getting way above themselves, and the next thing they think they can do is marry us. Jem, how can you hate Hitler so bad and then turn around and be ugly about folks right at home? Scout has witnessed Miss Gates being a hypocrite. She teaches that it's wrong to be prejudiced, and yet coming out of the courthouse, she's saying prejudiced, racist comments. It's time somebody put them in their place. What? Not okay. And Scout, a third grader, knows that it's not okay. So why can't the adults see this? It's because it's the way they've been raised. We need to change that in our society. We need to change the way that we raise our children. And you guys are the next generation to have kids. A long time from now, years and years and years from now, you will have children. And it will be your job to raise them and to shape the way that they think. Are you going to raise them with prejudice, ugly ways of thinking about people who are different than you? Or are you going to raise them to believe that folks are folks. It's up to you to make that change. I hope you do. I forgot to give you keywords in the other chapters, so here they are for all 4 chapters. Remember, send me 1 email with all 4 words. Chapter 23, your keyword was spit. Chapter 24, your keyword was strength. Chapter 25, mockingbird. And 26, prejudice. Don't wait until you have kids to change the way of thinking. Change your way of thinking to love one another and to accept one another for the way that God created each one of us.